Heroism is simultaneously the most enduring and transitory quality in all of human existence. Every generation, it seems, invents its own Odysseus. The ancient Greeks had Hercules, Americans of the Old West had Wild Bill Hickok, and today we have whoever the hell hides the recording equipment from Yoko Ono. And at least in the US, and indeed much of the West, the blueprint for chest-beating, jaw-jutting fortitude was once the spandex-clad comic book superhero. But if you've cracked a comic book in over the last decade or so, you're more likely to see a socio-political sermon than superheroics of any description. Turns out to the bi-coastal cunt colonies in LA and New York that run these studios and the corpos that control them, the blinding zenith of space-aged, cutting-edged heroism is imparting haggard-ass, hundreds of years old Marxist critical theory cloaked in cape shit, calling it contemporary and selling it to the fucking masses. Newsflash for you, hipsterella. We've had caricature-laden public propaganda since before ancient Romans took a break from butt-fucking the stable boy to paint graffiti of Mark Antony running a train on Attia. Hate to break it to you, bitch tits, but as new and progressive concepts go, Pinko Agitprop is about as avant-garde as a hee-haw reunion. As a result, we're a generation absolutely starved for classical exemplars of heroism. Legitimate, dive into a burning building to save a sick kitten kind of heroism. Not the I called a white granny a bigot for buying Chick-fil-A and the entire bus stood and clapped variety. But what if I told you there were an entire industry devoted to that kind of heroism? That somewhere in a quiet pocket of the print and comic industry, there were an entire treasure trove of politically incorrect, six-gun-slinging, burly-chested badasses, many of whom have a back catalog of content to rival even the almighty Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man. What if I told you it also boasts infinitely more variety than the uninspired muddlefucking modern Cape comics? What if I told you Batman's plagiarized from it, and so is Superman? That Alan Moore swiped most of his hacky hippie horseshit from it? That almost every Marvel movie to date owes a debt to its very existence? And what if I told you that most of it, as of this moment, is now fucking free? If you're weary of watching people with giant muscles and fucking superpowers sob about their problems while Wonder Woman braids her armpit hairs and grouses about gender quotas, it may be time for you to make the same jump I did some time ago. Fuck Marvel, disregard DC, and embrace the fucking pulp! Now, to address the pachyderm crouched stealthily in the corner of the room, what the glade-freshening fuck is pulp anyway? To avid devotees of it, this may seem fairly self-explanatory, but between the seeming obscurity of some of the subjects and the ground-splitting stupidity of journalists and YouTubers who have previously attempted to cover this subject, I find fuckloads of folks are utterly misinformed or outright clueless as to what pulp actually is. Some seem to think it's a phylum of film, for which we can presumably thank that moon-faced fucking hack Quentin Tarantino. Others, a kind of comic book. Well, good goddamn news, folks. You've already read it, because the true answer is both simpler and infinitely less obscure. Pulp Fiction, apart from being an impossibly overrated movie, is simply short stories. That's it. Ever read a fucking short story for one of your SATs or some shit? Congrats if you made it about a detective, cowboy, Air Force pilot, or fucking vigilante and printed it with a cover. You just read a fucking pulp. Now add in the occasional gorgeous black and white illustration and plot-driven, action-packed pistol play eternally abundant. That's pulp, baby. Ever watch Wolverine crying in some shit deconstructionist comic or modern movie and say to yourself, hey, whatever happened to the X-Men being badasses and fighting crime? Pat yourself on the back. You've already longed for comics to return to their pulp roots, and you may not have even known it. But something caused us to conflate comics and pulps. I mean, fuck, if I see one more IGN or Crack.com stink piece featuring the phrase pulp comic, I'll open fire like an FBI asset from the window of a Las Vegas hotel. And what lies slightly muddied the waters is the fact that many of these pulp heroes not only spun off into successful comics, but a fair few were fucking Xeroxed by some of the most popular present-day comic icons. But oh, we'll get to that. The purpose of today's Razor Force Pulptacular is to fire off a few names and recommendations for these seminal pop culture icons, and who could be more influential than one of the original masked men, the ageless swashbuckler Zorro.
Zorro, the fox so cunning and free. Zorro, who makes the sign of the Z.
From his first and what was supposed to be his last appearance in The Curse of Capistrano, published in 1919, the vigor and energy of this avenging swordsman has proven ageless. Set in the California territory in the waning days of the Gilded Age, while the character of Zorro himself has many of the magnetic qualities of Solomon Kane, the Shadow, and Batman, I think what truly kept this character alive for a fucking century is as much the setting as anything else. All the adventure of the Old West, with the flintlocks and fucking swordplay of the Three Musketeers, all propelled by a principal character who boasts that inimitable mystique of Alexandre Dumas' other enduring creation, the Count of Monte Cristo. Comics, cartoons, prose, multiple movies and movie serials. If you're breathing, you've watched some fucking Zorro. But if you've not yet parted the papyrus and read Zorro's inaugural appearance in 1919's The Curse of Capistrano, goddamn, do it! It's quick, it's fun, and did I mention it's fucking free now? Hell, if the cranky comments on my copyright video are any indication, and the public domain revives rather than suffocates stellar franchises and fucking characters, well then Zorro, who lapsed into the public domain over a decade ago, should be erupting into unparalleled relevance any day now. In fact, I'll just sit here and fucking wait.
The Shadow!
I am here, close to you, watching you. I am the Shadow.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows.
Now, if you watch my channel with any regularity or listen to the Shadowcast I record every month or so, you know all about the excellence of the Shadow, so I'll keep this short and skippy and instead explain the context. It was the late 20s and the early 30s, a period not coincidentally referred to as the Red Decade. Marxism and all of its socio-political underpinnings had suffused society to an extent not seen since. Gray morality, corrupt prokies, and Gatslian gangsters dealt death in the streets, while ever more civil liberties were surrendered to government, from gun rights to the ability to buy booze, all during a depression that combined to cultivate a populace more powerless than ever. And then a blood-curdling laugh reverberated through the concrete crags of urban New York.
The weed of crime bears bitter fruit. Crime does not pay. The Shadow knows.
An unbending, uncompromising avenger of evil for whom right was right, wrong was wrong, and the sentence was invariably death. Not always from himself, mind you. More often, the Shadow would engineer a demise that would only befall the villain if and when that villain attempted to take the life of an innocent, often with an ironic underpinning to punctuate the gesture. In The Red Menace, for example, a poisoner unwittingly ingests his own poison. In The Voodoo Master, a cult leader who uses color shock via a blood-red room to hypnotize his zombified followers is waylaid by an invisible foe, the crimson-clad Shadow.
Before a single finger could pull a revolver trigger, the suspended automatics blazed. Each .45 was withering. The aim of those weapons was incredible. They must have been held by living hands, even though such fists were invisible, for bullets found the bodies of Makino's henchmen. Arias sprawled. Manuel fell beside him. Others, driving forward, forgot the prisoners and aimed for the floating guns instead. The automatics had the bulge. Like living creatures handling themselves, they pointed, fired, then recoiled. The doorway cluttered with Makino's henchmen. Half a dozen were flattened before the others dived away for cover. That open door meant death. Makino knew it, and his hiss was venomous. The voodoo doctor had also leaped aside, but he had reached the wall outside the red room. His fingers clicked a switch. The lights of the red room were controlled from either side of the wall. Makino's action changed the glare. Ruddy bulbs faded. Ordinary light replaced them. The red room was a void no longer. It had become a crimson-walled compartment. Sayre, the only one in position to see within, was astonished by the sight before him. A figure stood in the very center of the room, a cloaked shape with collar upward. A shape that wore a downturned slouch hat with gloved hands that gripped those dreaded automatics. It was the figure of the Shadow, but changed. The Shadow was not clad in black. Hat, cloak, and gloves were crimson. A red shadow, one whose whole attire matched the walls of the crimson torture cell. In hope of finding the voodoo master's lair, he had ordered these garments of red, a garb that he was wont to wear, but of a different color. The lights and the curtains had rendered him invisible. Makino had regarded the red room as his greatest weapon. It had become a boomerang. The horror chamber had served the Shadow.
Contrary to DC writer Scott Snyder's abject retardation that the Shadow is a concept Batman perfected, in reading the Pulps and some of the better comics, you'll instead find the Shadow is a much deeper, more fully formed conception than his neutered cape-shit counterpart. As Wizard Magazine, Newsarama, and the sheep at Bleating Cool are still praising the likes of Frank Miller and Alan Moore for badly plagiarizing conceptions of justice, the law, and morality that the Shadow was more deeply exploring at his fucking inception. I just finished rereading The Black Master, only the 8th issue of the Shadow magazine, and far and away one of the finest Shadow stories, from which I humbly present to you the following excerpt. "Perhaps you wonder why I do not kill you," said the Black Master in a low, unchanging voice. "I shall tell you why. You are the only living man whom I have not cared to kill. You have sought to ferret out my crimes. You have discovered some of them, but not all. Let me ask you, and you may reply if you wish. Why do you seek to destroy me?" The Shadow laughed in a low, hissing tone.
I seek to destroy you
He said in a sibilant, whispering voice.
because you are a creature of crime. You have brought death upon those who have not deserved it.
"You too have resorted to crime," replied the Black Master.
Not unless the end has justified the means.
With me, there was a chuckle from the curtain. "It is the means that justifies the end. You are the only man in all the world who is like myself. Why should we care for human life? To me, human beings are stupid, useless creatures with which the earth is overburdened. I know no pity. You too are pitiless."
Only when I meet those who deserve no pity.
"None deserve pity," came the voice from the curtain. "Those who seek pity are mere creatures. You would not ask for pity, nor would I. There is only one emotion that I have ever known. That is vengeance." The speaker paused to let his final words impress themselves upon the listener. The shadow made no expression of interest. "I shall explain," continued the voice. "You, I take it from your actions, believe in justice, yet you find it in your own way. Where the law does not suffice, you forget the law. I believe in justice. One deed that I committed was inspired by justice. There was the death of Hubert Banks. Once long ago, I loved. He destroyed that love. The woman whom I had loved died because of that neglect. From then on, my life has been one of hate. I sought vengeance. I waited years to gain it. Then I destroyed him, inch by inch, until he died, a maniac, by his own hand. He knew the pangs of remorse when he died. That was justice. In order to destroy the man who deserved destruction, I required human tools. I chose those who were governed by greed and fear. When I had used them, I destroyed them. That, too, was justice."
Perhaps.
Agreed the shadow.
And by your own measure, your destruction would be justice also.
The hidden man chuckled. Journo jackasses are still creaming their culottes over a concept featured in a Shadow novel from 1932. The Shadow wasn't proto-Batman because, bitch, Batman's still not as popular as the Shadow was in his prime. Don't believe me? The Shadow is the only character in history to be the most popular in two separate media simultaneously, while both those media were still in their prime. The most popular pulp character for over 2 decades, and the same could be said for his counterpart on radio. How popular? Put it this way. The Walking Dead, at the height of its stratospheric popularity in or around, seasons 4 and 5, was pulling down a rating of anywhere between 6.2 to 8.7 per episode, an Olympian denominator in almost any decade. 1 year after the Shadow's radio and pulp popularity had begun to decline following the end of World War II in 1945, he was still routinely earning a rating of between 8.1 and 12.6. And believe it or not, radio ratings back then weren't figured all that much differently from how TV ratings are today. And that year, 1946, would see the release of 3 separate Shadow films in a single fucking year. He was a bit of a big deal. Better still, he inspired an influx of imitators long before Batman Xeroxed his first 5 years of stories from the Shadow magazine. The Spider, the original Phantom, no, not the purple guy, we're talking the Phantom Detective here. You know, the guy Will Eisner renamed the Spirit, Secret Agent X, and on and on and on ad astra. But there was only one successful in-house spin-off, and he would become an enduring icon in his own right.
This is Doc Savage, the man of bronze.
Have no fear, the man of bronze is here.
It takes a Chad to create a Chad, and that's precisely what happened when real-life adventurer, world traveler, member of the Explorers Club, and pulp writer par excellence, Lester Dent sank his teeth into Doc Savage. The Man of Bronze spun out of the incredible success of The Shadow in 1933, so explicitly, in fact, that his initial audition for the character came when he was asked to write a one-off Shadow story to help ease Walter B. Gibson's unearthly twice-a-month workload. The result? The Golden Vulture, one of the more action-packed chapters of the Shadow's early years, but one that sat in a safe for nearly a decade before Gibson reworked it, released it, whereupon it served as the partial plot basis for the Shadow film serial in 1940. What the Shadow is to Batman, Doc Savage is to Superman, who is essentially 4 parts Doc, 1 part John Carter of Mars. From his Arctic fortress of solitude to his Man of Bronze eponym, superior strength, hell, he's even described as Superman, published over 5 fucking years before Action Comics #1. As for Doc Savage himself, You need to think like Superman with a side of Indiana Jones, just a dash of Sherlock Holmes, and only 5 exceptional agents to the Shadow's dozens of agents, warring with everything from crooked businessmen to Mayan monsters, imbibing in archaeology and international intrigue with a side of sci-fi. The variety and nonstop action of Doc Savage proved a profound enough formula. Doc Savage novels are still being printed at present. Far from a feckless modern Marvel or DC superhero, hand-wrings his way through stories that celebrate his inadequacy and lack of moral certitude, Doc Savage's credo is as blindingly badass as his bronze skin.
Let us strive every moment of our lives to make ourselves better and better to the best of our ability, so that all may profit by it. Let us think of the right, and lend our assistance to all who may need it, with no regard for anything but justice, without loss of courage. Let us be considerate of our country, our fellow citizens, and our associates in everything we say and do. Let us do right to all, and wrong no man.
Doc Savage, like nearly all other pulp icons, harkens back to a bygone heroism that engenders aspiration over exasperation in its readership. So it should come as no surprise that at 181 issues, Doc Savage magazine is the only other single-character pulp to come anywhere close to the Shadow's jaw-dropping 325 pulp novelettes. But the Doc can boast something even the Shadow can't. His books, upon being reprinted in the 60s, were then continued all the way into the 1990s and then beyond. When The Rock briefly signed on for a Doc Savage reboot, he pushed the hashtag first superhero. And while that isn't technically true, as he was a spin-off of the very first superhero, he certainly did inspire Superman, and he's at least one of the first comic book superheroes. And speaking of comics...
How do I look? Like a hood ornament. Stand clear. What was that? Hand over the rockets!
The Rocketeer.
Go get him, kid.
Now here I'm cheating a bit, but much like the Phantom, who I also recommend, the Rocketeer is often lumped in with his era of creations, this despite the fact that his first issue emerged in the 1980s. The reasons for such are obvious. He may not be a product of the 30s, but he spiritually and morally embodies the entirety of it. From his Buck Rogers and Commando Cody inspirations, to his 1930s setting, to the almighty Mauser strapped to his hip, the Rocketeer, despite never to my knowledge being featured in actual prose novels, is more pulp than some actual pulp. And apart from the excellent movie, this recommendations portion is going to be a bit of a quickie because there's really only one set of Rocketeer comics. Everything created by his original creator, Dave Stevens, which thankfully has been helpfully compiled into a solitary collection called The Rocketeer, The Complete Adventures. Keyword, complete. There is nothing before this, there is nothing after this, because after that, it's nothing but dogshit Disney fan fiction and a horrifically exploitative IDW Comics dogfuck called Rocketeer Adventures, and I want to say this for the record and fuck mincing words. Every creator involved in Rocketeer Adventures, not to mention the race swap Disney Junior CGI spin-off and inbound race swap movie reboot, should be fucking ashamed of themselves. And we're not talking any old bums in comics here. These are some of the more legendary creators in comicdom. John Cassaday, Mike Mignola, Mike and Laura Allred, Kurt Busiek, fucking Mike Kaluta let himself get roped into this bullshit. Chris Weston, Jeff Darrow, you should be fucking ashamed for being part of a comic that purports to stick as closely as possible to the classic character in question. Then 2 issues deep, his girlfriend Betty is replacing him as the Rocketeer. Why? Because he was shot. You know, that thing that happened to him in the classic Dave Stevens series several times, and yet he never once needed his girlfriend to fly around in fucking fishnets and save his ass. Gorsh! Worse still, you shit stains festooned each issue with classic Dave Stevens pinups, as if to imply this is anywhere even adjacent to the series you're stealing. I mean this from the bottom of my bowels. fuck each and every one of you for participating in every IDW Rocketeer comic ever published to date. I don't give a shit how much you were paid. I don't give a shit how much you needed the money. You motherfuckers made a mockery out of the life's work of a man who is no longer alive to defend his fucking legacy. And that fuck you goes double for the Daredevil ruining duo of Mark Waid and Chris Samney, whose Rocketeer Cargo of Doom is among the worst Rocketeer comics ever printed. If Dave Stevens' name is on it, like right here, buy it. If it ain't, lob it into the fucking sun.
It's your last chance. Where is the girl? There is evil walking this earth, and I will hunt it down and send it burning back to hell.
Which brings me to someone you should already be familiar with, Solomon Kane. And before you clap back with Conan, yes, Conan's goddamn great. A mythic hero, par excellence. It's just that A, his core thematic mold is one of unencumbered freedom rather than any actual fixed fucking morality. And B, well, just look at this badass. Slouch hat, flintlocks, saber, and a motherfucking musket. I'm shitting diamond hard boners just looking at him. And more to the point, he illustrates several aspects of the Pulp era protagonist. An unbending iron will, perfectly defined moral code, and in the capacity to occasionally surprise the reader by employing all of the above in error. Sure, Solomon Kane starts out his adventures happening upon a dying maiden, a woman he has never known and never will, and in an instant of moral certitude and a single phrase defines himself and his motivations outright.
Suddenly, the slim form went limp. The man eased her to the earth and touched her brow lightly. "Dead," he muttered. Slowly he rose, mechanically wiping his hand upon his cloak. A dark scowl had settled on his somber brow, yet he made no wild, reckless vow, swore no oath by saints or devils. "Men shall die for this," he said coldly.
But the story of Solomon Kane is, I would argue, more compelling than Conan, because as this dour, sword-sworn Puritan Avenger stalks the earth in search of heathens and hellish abominations to slay, he actually encounters such cruelty, avarice, and otherworldly eldritch horrors, even he begins to doubt his faith. In Wings in the Night, Solomon allows himself to socialize with a kindly African village who nurses him back to health after a strange encounter with a weird winged creature, yet discovers to his dismay that, spoiler alert, his association with these kindly people is also what ultimately brings about their deaths.
Kane looked at the shambles that had been Bogonda, and he looked at the death mask of Guru. And he lifted his clenched fists above his head, and with glaring eyes raised and writhing lips flecked with froth, he cursed the sky and the earth and the spheres above and below. In one soul-shaking burst of blasphemy, he cursed the gods and devils who make mankind their sport, and he cursed man, who lives blindly on and blindly offers his back to the iron-hoofed feet of his gods.
His heart blackened and his faith at its lowest ebb. This is where an utterly shit modern Marvel yarn would have him make a heel turn or get snapped out of existence by a purple Shrek, or these days have his job done for him by some pan-gendered sea anemone in a Miss Marvel outfit. But here's where the Pulp protagonist stands utterly apart, because then shit gets Solomon Kane. He massacres the Paleolithic villains, sending them screaming back to hell, and then he stands atop a mountain, overlooking the ravaged countryside, and offers a blood-soaked sermon as epitaph.
And slowly, like light breaking through mists, sanity returned to him. "The light of God's morning enters even into dark and lonesome lands," said Solomon Kane somberly. "Evil rules in the wastelands of the earth, but even evil may come to an end. Dawn follows midnight, and even in this lost land the shadows shrink. Strange are thy ways, O God of my people. And who am I to question thy wisdom? My feet have fallen in evil ways, but thou hast brought me forth scatheless, and hast made me a scourge for the powers of evil. Over the souls of men spread the condor wings of colossal monsters, and all manner of evil things prey upon the heart and soul and body of man. Yet it may be in some far day the shadows shall fade, and the Prince of Darkness be chained forever in his hell.
But this steely savagery isn't reserved for the sword and sorcery genre. In fact, I'd argue, as the genre's pulp protagonists are portrayed more and more as gray by the bloviating snake oil salesmen in the current entertainment industry, the more the men featured within those stories start to resemble the very whitest of white knights. And here I am very much talking about the rudiments of film noir, more particularly the pulp detective stories that started the celluloid hoedown with a double shot of whiskey and a cyanide chaser. Raymond Chandler's The Simple Art of Murder codified this phenomenon in profound fashion when he simultaneously defined his own idea of a hero and threw a monkey wrench into the Moral Ambiguity Brigade's bullshit when they claim film noir, which is largely cribbed from Raymond Chandler's books, is about gray morality. But down these mean streets a man must go who is not himself mean, who is neither tarnished nor afraid. The detective in this kind of story must be a man. He is the hero. He is everything. He must be a complete man, and a common man, and yet an unusual man. He must be, to use a rather weathered phrase, a man of honor, by instinct, by inevitability, without thought of it, and certainly without saying it. He must be the best man in his world, and a good enough man for any world. I do not care much about his private life. He is neither a eunuch nor a satyr. I think he might seduce a duchess, and I am quite sure he would not spoil a virgin. If he is a man of honor in one thing, he is that in all things. He is a relatively poor man, or he would not be a detective at all. He is a common man, or he could not go among common people. He has a sense of character, or he would not know his job. He will take no man's money dishonestly, and no man's insolence without a due and dispassionate revenge. He is a lonely man, and his pride is that you will treat him as a proud man or be very sorry you ever saw him. He talks as the man of his age talks, that is, with rude wit, a lively sense of the grotesque, a disgust for sham, and a contempt for pettiness. The story is this man's adventure in search of a hidden truth, and it would be no adventure if it did not happen to a man fit for adventure. He has a range of awareness that startles you, but it belongs to him by right, because it belongs to the world he lives in. If there were enough like him, the world would be a very safe place to live in, without becoming too dull to be worth living in. To hammer home the knight who needs a shave symbology, Raymond Chandler's working name for his famous Philip Marlowe detective character, even before he was named Carmody, was Mallory, a reference to Thomas Mallory, the author of Le Morte d'Arthur, the story which famously featured King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table.
Rhonda Farr gets a message to meet a blackmailer at Tango's place. Who shows up? You show up. What more can I say?
You could tell me who you're working for.
Huh?
Rhonda Farr didn't call any cops.
Who said she did? Maybe we know a hell of a lot more than you think we know.
That still wouldn't be much.
Don't get too smart, blackmailer.
Okay, detective. Slap on the cuffs. Let's go down to headquarters. I'm turning myself in.
Maybe I'll give you a break. I mean, your shakedown didn't play.
There was no shakedown, McDonald, not by me. I just threw a curveball to see who swung at it.
What are you getting at?
You fell off the straight and narrow right into the sewer. Put up the gun, McDonald. You may be a bent cop, but you're no murderer.
It's not an accident I cite these two examples. Noir and fantasy are my two favorite genres, and without lapsing into an infomercial, they're also the two genres I combine in my own pulp series, Night Vale, the second of which is completed and being edited for publication later this year. Point being, pulp is ageless, and as we approach what we hope is a recession, but is mathematically more likely to be a depression, with riots in the streets tacitly endorsed by a corrupt political class cashing in on the disarray and encroaching authoritarianism, folks, it looks like we've done done skipped the roaring 20s and rolled right on into a second red decade. But unlike your fathers and grandfathers who sat stoically with their thumbs up their asses as the culture warped about them, it's time to rear back and fucking surpass them. Folks, it's time to stop retreating from the culture and become the fucking culture. Reject modernity. Embrace pulp. Embrace untrammeled heroism. Remake modernity and remake morality. I'm Razor Fist. God fucking speed.
You must have done something pretty fine to get as high as you are, Mr. Brown. I'm looking into that. I'm going to open you up and I'm going to operate. I hate to think of what I'll find.
But I tell you, Joe, a righteous man.